Hello students, here's Professor Plinio Monteiro, and in this video we are going to introduce the content of the third unit. And the aim of this unit is to analyze the impact of globalization on specific market environments. We're going to start talking about political and economical dimensions. And in the next lectures, we're going to move to analyze demographical and social cultural dimensions and how these will impact consumption and, of course, the way that you're going to plan and execute your marketing plans. Let's start with the discussion of the political and economic environment and how it's important to look to some elements of this dimension of the market environment when you prepare yourself to operate in different countries in the world. This means that the objectives of this lecture will be to analyze the political and legal environment and how you make a given country attractive or not for your operations, and also to explain the steps for the political risk analysis and how you can understand the future events and create scenarios upon that, and also make a distinction between non-trade barriers and tariff trade barriers that can create difficulties when you try to operate in different countries in the world. And finally, how business can address legal problems and which kind of problems can arise in international marketing. These pictures make a summary of the main aspects that we're going to discuss in this lecture. First, on sovereignty and how these impact the way that you operate in different countries abroad. Also, the political and economical risks and the nature of taxes, including non-trade, including the tariff trade barriers. Also, explain the different types of seizures of assets and how can these represent a problem and a threat for a business trying to operate in a foreign country. And finally, talking somehow about the international law and how this legal system can be very important when you try to develop your international marketing strategy. First, we need to be aware that each nation state will have their own sovereignty. This means that each state have the right to let the citizens to establish the laws, to establish the politics, and each nation state is free to do your own rules and laws. And in that way, we mean that the activities that you run within their borders need to be run, they can manage that without interference of external forces. And of course, international law, sometimes the internal affairs can have a huge impact in global, in other countries in the world. And in that cases, sometimes countries can say, okay, we're not going to comply, we're not going to accept this practice that you are running right now. And sometimes this can lead to problems like wars and so on. And of course, also some nation states, when they try to integrate more, especially with some in trade areas, or when they create some preferential trade agreements. Basically, these preferential trade agreements will create more integration, but at the same time, each nation state will have a reduced power to establish their own politics. And this is the exchange of greater prosperity and less sovereignty. Knowing that international marketing will lead with international politics and international law, we will need to be aware that the political risks analysis is a very important step in international marketing strategies. And of course, you need to look for this political risk, that is the risk of change in the political environment or government policy that would adversely affect a company's ability to operate effectively and profitably. And let's take an example. Sometimes you can have a problem, a political issue in the country, like elections or the change of a politics or a military coup, and this can represent risks for business operating there. And this political risk analysis is basically trying to make a picture, to make a broad overview of the main political affairs that are happening in that country, and trying to understand what are the potential impacts of a given outcome to the business that you're doing in that country. And if you have a high level of political risk, of course, a country will have a lot of problems to attract investments. In countries where you have a lot of issues, you don't know which kind of politics, more open to the market or more close to the market, more looking to the social and social affairs, for instance. So in these cases, we don't have a lot of we don't have any certainty on the next event, and in that case, business will become afraid of investing a lot of money, and this can create difficulties for the country to bring new investments. In terms of global marketing, we need to be aware that the political and economical environment will always be divided into regions. The home country, the country that you are operating, the country where your business came from, and the host country, the country that you are trying to enter. And of course, we have two political and economic environments. The political and economic environment in the home country, and the political and economic environment in the host country. In that case, usually we will have some kind of barriers to establish the trade and the marketing between these two regions or countries. Usually, home country will create a lot of incentives for national business to operate abroad. Sometimes they're going to reduce the taxes if you're just exporting in basically all countries in the world. You pay no taxes if you're exporting. And the reason why is that when your business from your home country go to operate abroad or go start exporting, basically you're bringing more money for home country. So they have a lot of incentives to let business operating in different countries in the world. In the other side, usually the host country will try to protect their own markets. So when they protect the markets, they are protecting their industries, they are protecting their jobs, they are protecting um, their culture. And because of that, usually host countries you create a lot of political and legal barriers for international trade. In some cases, home country can create some barriers for exports or for operating abroad, but it's much more common to have a lot of barriers created by the host countries. And of course, a given firm needs to understand which kind of barriers will exist in a relation with a given country, and this will be directly related to the kind of PTAs, preferential trade agreements, and the nature of the bilateral relations between the countries that you're trying to operate, your home country and the host country. Most of times, home country will create incentives for national firms to operate abroad. And what kind of incentives and programs you can look to understand which kind of incentives can you achieve. First, you can have analysis of the government promotion. And in that case, try to look if your government have some special programs for creating incentives for exporting, for operating abroad, and even to the internationalization of the firm. Also, you can look to the home country environment, looking for financial activities. For instance, you can search for credits for exports. You can look for credits for having guarantees and security when you try to operate abroad. and especially related to commercial or political risks. And many of these financial activities can have special lines of financing or funding from the government when they are trying to create incentives for a given sector to operate abroad. Also, you can look for information services. In that case, many government agencies and public institutions will give information to help small and medium-sized enterprises to operate in new countries. So you can go to the embassy and look there to see more, to look for more information on the country that are trying to operate, or even how you can manage the local laws and use them to operate in a foreign country. Also, you can look to export facilitating activities. That can be something like trade offices. We have in Minas Gerais, we had in the past the Exporta Minas. It was a program that helped small business to export their production, mainly on cheese and cachaça. You can look to the consulate, to the embassies of home and host countries. You can look to special nation fairs that are trying to mix different countries. For instance, a trade of Brazil and France trade. Then you can go to that fair or that mission and see what they are discussing and which kind of incentives they are bringing for business. And also, you can look to promotion by private organizations. So not only governments will try to promote the international trade, but also you can have private organizations. In that case, you can go to the trade associations or industry. For instance, we have in Minas Gerais, FIENG. It's the Federation of Industries of Minas Gerais. And we have SEBRAE. They have a lot of SEBRAE. It's a public institution funded by the government. And their goal is to improve the business for small and very small business. And they have special programs to create incentives and to giving more knowledge to small firms to start operating in different countries. And also you can look to commerce chambers, like for instance the AmCham is an American Chamber of Commerce. So they have offices in many cities in Brazil, and you can go there if you try to have relations with United States. And for instance, you have the commerce chambers of Germany, and we have many others. So if you're trying to have operations with a given country, go to these. You can go to these commerce chambers and look to what kind of trade, what kind of deal, what kind of incentives they can give you to start operations with a given country. Now, when you look to the host country environment, you need to be aware of the many type of risks that can happen when you start operating in a new region. In that case, you can have the ownership risk. Basically, is when you have a risk of the government trying to steal your property, to make like a confiscation or nationalize your industry, and including the risk of life or to have something stolen because of security affairs in the country. Also, you need to look to operating risks. For instance, you can have interferences in the firm's operation, like interferences in terms of new laws and regulations that can create difficulties for you to operate on that country. And also, you can have the transfer risk. Is the risk of transferring money from host country to home country. So in many countries, it's not so hard to operate in the foreign country, but also try to bring the profit back to the home country. Then you need to pay a lot of taxes, or you need to comply with some problems there, or even you can have some currency problems that can reduce your profit when you operate in the long term, or especially during some kind of crisis. Let's take a look to the trade barriers. What is this? Basically, trade barriers are laws, rules, tariffs that will try to create some competitive advantage to favor local firms, and usually will try to create a discrimination against foreign firms. The aim of trade barriers can be divided in two. The first one, countries can create trade barriers to protect their domestic producers. So basically, they are trying to protect the business, the jobs, and the local economy. In that case, basically, the countries can create a lot of protection, but you know that in many cases this can reduce the competitiveness of local firms because since they are not competing with foreign firms that are more competitive, and basically these local firms can stop investing in innovation, stop taking care about productivity, and after some time, probably these firms will become very outdated. And of course, many times we have events where this protection will be destroyed. So a specific political group can eliminate these trade barriers, this protection to local firms, and then usually local firms will be destroyed by foreign competition. We have some examples in Brazil. For instance, the textile industry in Brazil was basically destroyed by China. But we have a very close and protected market until the mid of 90s. And during a very long period of time, like 80, more than 100 years, these firms were protected from foreign competition. And once they opened the market, basically all these firms in Brazil got to bankruptcy. So basically they were not able to keep their operations. One second reason to create trade barriers is basically to generate revenue. And in that case, basically the country you try to use to create a barrier just to receive money from foreign business. And usually the less developed countries that don't have any industry operating there, can create trade barriers because of that. And especially if they are not so efficient in making the accurate recordings of taxes. In that case, they can create taxes for imports, and with that, they can receive some money, and it's very easy to control the borders, much easier than controlling the internal affairs and the accountability of each firm. We can have the tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. Tariff barriers is basically related to the money that you're going to pay when you try to enter with a product in a given country. Let's start with a specific category of tariff barrier. Basically, these are a specific tax or fee that need to be paid to enter with a given category of product. So it will be applied just for some categories of product. And also you can have the ad valorem. It's very common. In that case, you're going to have a tax represented by a percentage of the value that you estimate that the product have. You can have some ad valorem when you have some general categories like a painting or a piece of art, and it's very common to use an ad valorem, and then they're going to make an estimate of the value of that product, and based on this value you're going to pay a percentage of this estimated value as a tax. And also you can have the discriminatory tariff barriers. In that case, you're going to create a specific fee or tax just for some countries. This can be created because you have some political issues. For instance, you want to create a pressure to a country take more care about the environment, and then you can put some tax on that. Or you can create a special tax for a product that you believe that is destroying one specific industry in your country. And of course, these are not permitted by the World Trade Organization. So if you use a discriminatory tax, this can create problems for you with the World Trade Organization. And also, if you create some incentives reducing the taxes for some country, other countries can complain and try to have the same taxes to operate with you in this country. And let's look to non-tariff barriers. Indeed, Many times, non-tariff barriers can create a lot of difficulties when you try to operate in a given country. The first one will be the quotas. So basically, you have a restriction on the amount in terms of volume or value that you can export or import from a given country. For instance, you can have the quota for some countries can create a quota telling that, okay, you cannot export more than 30% of the internal production of gasoline. And they're doing so in order to let this product in the internal market. So it's a quota created by home country to avoid the exportation of a lot of products. But it's more common to have a quota of importation, of the imports. In that case, basically you cannot import more than a certain quantity, especially when you are thinking about parts or inputs for a given industry. Also, we can have embargoes, and in that case, basically you're going to ban completely the trade with a given country, and this can be related to one product, one category of product, or to any kind of trade. We have the example of Cuba, for example, with United States created the embargo on Cuba, and basically they don't have any kind of trade. Another type of non-tariff barrier is the administrative delays. Basically, you can have a lot of bureaucracy. You spend a lot of time to let the product enter into the country. They can create a lot of including some illegal things like corruption can be related to that. And because of that, if you try to sell your product in a given country, so that you have so many difficulties for that, and it will be so time consuming that this creates barriers for trade. For instance, in Brazil, it was not so long ago, we have a lot of difficulties for importing products related to biological experiments. And because of that, basically, if you try to create a new medicine here, a new product in this area, sometimes you're going to lose everything that you bought in foreign countries and things that are not produced in Brazil because the product stayed in the customs during years. And after that, basically, the product was rotten. So basically, you lose everything that you bought. And this is one example of an administrative delay that can create can be a non-tariff barrier. And finally, you can have the local content requirements. And this is the case when the government tells that local firms need to have at least 1% of local parts when you try to assemble a new product. For instance, if you're trying to sell a car in Brazil, you need to have at least 50% of the parts of this car produced in Brazil. This will be one example of a local content requirement, meaning that if you try to operate in Brazil, to sell your cars in Brazil, at least 50% of the parts, and also usually the car will need to be assembled in the country. This is one example of a local content requirement. Another important aspect to analyze in the political and economical environment is the nature of taxes. Try to look to the kind of government taxation policies related to production, consumption, and also to business. If you have a country with high level of direct taxation, basically when you apply a lot of taxes directly in the consumption, in this kind of country, you can have a lot of black market. In that case, a lot of people try to buy and sell products without paying any taxes. And if you have a high level of taxation, this can lead to a huge gray market. So if you tax the production and the distribution, basically you have a lot of companies producing low-level products of low quality, basically fake products. And this is one example that happens in many countries in the world. So look to the level of taxations. If your most taxes are directly applied to consumption and the level of taxes directly to the production and distribution, and figure out how this can impact the way that you're going to compete against potential black market and gray market threats. Also, look to the corporate taxation. What will be the level of corporate taxation applied in that country? Sometimes you can reduce the risk of high level of taxation to business, shifting the location of income. For instance, you can put your company to have the revenues and profits in tax havens like Bahamas and so on. And in other times, when when you try to operate in a country with high levels of corporate taxation, another alternative is not to make a direct investment, but just try to make a loan or some type of partnership to operate in a given country. And then this is the end of this video, where we talked mainly about the political analysis when you compare the host and the home country, and especially detailing the types and the implications of different trade barriers. So this is it. See you in the next video.